technologies will in turn impact work zones. And all of this is ultimately working towards compatibility and harmonization between all of the different technologies that are proposed in both the near and the long-term future. Next slide, please. So with that, not surprisingly, the goal of this project is to help transportation agencies prepare for the impacts that these advanced technologies, specific to connected and automated vehicle technologies, will have on work zones. And on the next slide, we'll go through the objectives that have really guided the overall project and what we're working towards here. So first up is identifying technical needs and potential impacts of connected and automated vehicles in work zones. And then this is kind of a common theme here where we're recognizing this as a bit of a two-way street, where we also need to recognize and consider the possible impacts that work zones might have on connected and automated vehicle technologies. We want to make sure we document any deployed and planned practices considering connected and automated vehicles in work zones. We want to make sure we evaluate the qualitative and quantitative benefits of these practices and technologies. So for example, the return on investment, as well as improved safety, mobility, and user worker awareness. We want to make sure we identify any research that's still needed to address gaps in implementing these various connected and automated vehicle practices. And finally, this will all culminate in development of materials that will help educate stakeholders on our research findings through a variety of different means, including a mix of, for example, webinars and other materials that can be easily distributed. Next slide, please. So next I'll go through the technical approach, and these are the 7 primary tasks that are driving this project. And if we skip over project management, focusing on task 1, that's our literature review and development of our engagement plan. And I'll talk through all of these briefly in the forthcoming slides. Once we get through the development of that plan, task 2 is the actual implementation of that outreach, where we work with stakeholders and gather feedback from transportation agencies and industry and other stakeholders that we identify. Task 3 and 4 deal with the development of a framework for evaluating benefits and challenges for selected technologies, and then the actual evaluation of those technologies, as well as the identification of research topics. Task 5 is, like I mentioned before, a culmination of everything that's learned from tasks 1 through task 4 and the development and implementation of our stakeholder education plan. And then finally, task 6 wraps the whole project up with the development of our final report and related deliverables. So on the upcoming slides, if we can advance one more, we'll go a little bit deeper into what we've been working on and what's around the corner. If you can go back one slide, please, to task 1A. Great, thank you. So this is our literature review, and obviously this is a pretty broad topic area. We, building on past efforts, really spent a lot of time focusing on literature that deals with obviously connected and automated vehicles, as well as work zones, and trying to find the parallels between the two and start to really wrap our heads around what the potential for impacts are, both from an operations and an infrastructure perspective. We also pay particular attention to relevant technologies, those that are in production or upcoming or proposed, and like I mentioned, looking at the impacts that they have individually on work zones and vice versa. And that literature review has been submitted to the panel for review. We're actually responding to comments right now, but it basically summarizes the sources that we reviewed and the key concepts, a lot of which is going to inform the upcoming engagement task. So if we can advance to task 1B. So there are 2 parts of task 1B. The first being the identification of contexts that we want to reach out to. And the list that you see on the right is a high-level snapshot of who we're hoping to reach out to and gather feedback from for our initial survey and interview and focus group components that we have under development. And like I mentioned before, obviously Department of Transportation agencies at the federal, state, and local levels, as well as reaching out to law enforcement agencies and traffic operations centers, et cetera. But then we also want to hear from industry. So like we heard from CAMP, for example, earlier today. We want to hear from other original equipment manufacturers and OEMs, auto innovators, automotive suppliers, both on the light and heavy vehicle side, as well as navigation and mapping companies. But we also want to interface, and we're already working with many related organizations, both for the identification of contacts, but to get their assistance in reaching a wide audience so that we're making sure that we're getting all of the necessary point of views and perspectives to help influence what we really need to know in the development of these materials. Next slide, please. So the other part that's under development currently is the actual engagement plan. And we've always seen this as a multi-staged approach. Starting with an online survey and or interview component where we capture individual responses from all the contacts that we've identified. And this allows us to get these responses without the influence of others, like in a more focus group or a group dynamic, for example. And we'll capture a lot of information about the specific respondent, but ultimately, we are going to make sure that we anonymize all the responses and only group responses by the organization type, since at least at that level, it's important to understand where that feedback is coming from and the perspective of the respondent in terms of the type of feedback that they're providing. And obviously, this feedback that we get through this will influence the remaining tasks. And we have some targeted focus areas that we're trying to incorporate into the survey. And at the end of this presentation, since this is what we're really focused on right now, we go into a little bit more detail of the type of questions and topic areas that we're trying to include here. And I should mention that the reason I have and/or between surveys and interviews, so the online survey is going to be what we push out first. The interviews are there if that's a preference for people, or if we feel like that will give us a better chance of capturing feedback from a wider group if we do need to reach out and basically conduct the online survey in a more traditional interview approach. The second part of the multi-staged approach is our planned focus groups. The discussion guides for those will largely be informed by the surveys. And this will really allow us to explore different issues, especially those that are more complex, in greater detail, in a more group dynamic, try to dive a little bit deeper into the issues, gain consensus, for example. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this graphic here is just a high-level illustration of what we're trying to accomplish in our outreach. And we're basically using this to help develop our survey materials. But if we think about work zones, and specifically at the application or the proposed technology level, we want to understand how those impact advanced driver assistance system technologies, connected vehicle applications, near-term and long-term automation, but also the impact going in both directions. And we're trying to make sure we understand how the technology impacts all affected users, the benefits that are offered versus the challenges posed, any availability of new data and the ability to process those data, how the information is disseminated, the responsibility of execution or implementation of those technologies, and the appropriate roles of agencies and manufacturers. And it's also important to consider the impacts from a work zone type, right? So short-term versus long-term, static versus mobile, roadway type, for example. And realistically, so task one is the development of this engagement plan. Task two is putting that in motion. And so this follows in line with what I just talked about, with phase one being the surveys that we distribute online. With that interview option, we'll continue to review and expand our contact and distribution lists to make sure that we are casting a wide net and getting feedback from those we really need to hear from. And then obviously analyzing our responses in parallel. And by analyzing the responses as the surveys are being completed, if you go to the next, yep, thank you very much, will allow us to finalize the discussion guides to support the focus groups. And like I mentioned before, this will be an opportunity that we can expand and gather more feedback, particularly on the more complex meetings, or complex issues, I should say, with the expectation that we'll have multiple virtual gatherings in the coming months to accomplish these goals and objectives. So task 3 is the development of our framework for evaluating costs and benefits. And I know we're largely, just based on time constraints, covering these at a pretty high level. Happy to answer questions at the end. And then we also have an email address if there are any questions that we don't get to that you'd like to follow up with us on after today's presentation. But under this framework, what we're going to try to do is build on the feedback, again, obtained during the engagement efforts, incorporating key components that are represented in the graphic to the right. So again, recognizing the target user, the maturity of the technology, associated costs, benefits and measures of effectiveness, respective challenges, and the research status and needs, and all that will feed into the perceived or the proposed benefit cost ratios and assessment. If we go to the next slide, we obviously recognize that the framework is going to be affected by different types of technologies. So whether that's vehicle-based, such as road users, work vehicles and equipment, infrastructure-based, and there arguably, or there absolutely should be another bullet here for work zone personnel and different technologies that they might be wearing, for example. And we also want to consider qualitative versus quantitative measures. So for qualitative benefits or effectiveness, looking at rankings based on impacts on lives and health, for example, and converting that to a normalized score. And coupled with the quantitative benefits, for example, life cycle benefit cost. So for task 4, with panel approval, we'll implement this framework and actually evaluate the benefits and challenges of selected technologies. And this will consist of compiling available data and describing the data availability for gap analysis, finalizing the analysis framework and revising continuously to improve the analysis and output, analyze and document benefits and challenges through conducting the analysis, and then finally analyzing data and developing the research gaps and identify where those gaps are specific to the research needs. And through that, we want to make sure that we're considering the benefits and or cost effectiveness, the readiness of technology with respect to implementation, technology development and deployment challenges, data and research gaps and tech champions. And we also want to make sure that we're prioritizing and considering technologies that are near term. So for example, 1 to 3 years away versus midterm, 3 to 5 years versus long term, 5 to 10 years. Next slide, please. And this will all culminate into the stakeholder education plan. So everything that we gather and capture and learn from tasks 1 through 4 will allow us to develop materials and a comprehensive educational plan that can be used for a variety of different settings for the education of a wide range of stakeholders. With the ultimate goal of making sure that we're doing as much as possible to prepare members of transportation agencies for these advanced technologies. And just like with the other tasks with panel review and approval, we will implement this plan, finalize the materials, and conduct a variety of different webinars, but also develop materials that can be distributed either through conferences or slides or technical briefs, for example, to better help get the word out, essentially. And then finally, task 6 is really more of a summary for all of our final deliverables, just pulling everything together. This consists of the educational materials, the final report that will document the entire project and all the specified deliverables, an electronic presentation of the framework and outreach strategies, recommendations for future research, and then finally the implementation of research findings, so our technical memorandum. So this brings us to where we are currently. If we look at the slide, on this slide here, talks about where we are currently. So this project kicked off late last year in October. We actually had the kickoff briefing in early November. And to date, what we've focused on so far is the literature review, which I mentioned we've since completed, but we're responding to panel feedback. And so our primary focus right now is the identification of contacts and the engagement plan. Along with that, though, knowing that task 2, the actual engagement, is right around the corner, there are some preparation tasks that are currently in progress, and we anticipate that the actual outreach will start in late April and go into the summer. So that consists of the survey and the interviews, as well as the focus groups. So tasks 3 and 4, the development and the implementation of our benefits and challenges analysis, that will be coming up later this summer into the fall. And then the development of our stakeholder educational plan will be more of in the late fall into early spring of next year, wrapping the project and the final report up in spring to summer of 2022. So to wrap this all up, we wanted to talk about next steps and discussion. And so where we are right now, I've mentioned a couple times, is the engagement plan development. And this is currently underway and nearing completion with respect to contact identification and the outreach materials. So we have a solid draft of our survey and our interview approach, as well as an initial draft of the discussion guides, recognizing that, again, those will be largely influenced by the type of feedback we get through our surveys. We have a panel review in April that, again, assuming we get the green light there, we should be able to release these outreach materials shortly thereafter. Task 2 for the engagement, I mentioned that preparation tasks are in progress, and this is specific right now to our institutional review board application, as well as starting to develop the online survey tool, since there are some complexities there, obviously, making sure that that is a worthwhile experience for everyone who chooses to complete the survey. So on the next couple slides, I just wanted to give a higher level snapshot of what we're including in the survey, since hopefully many of you will see this in the coming months. But for those that aren't able to get the overview of the project, such as yourselves today, this will include a brief introduction that will describe the project in the background and why it's important that we gather this feedback. And as I mentioned before, there's a component here where we want to make sure we collect necessary background about our stakeholders and our respondents. So this includes the employer and their job title, their position type, related job duties, specific to connected and automated vehicles and our work zones, and familiarity with connected and automated vehicle technologies. And then specific to connected and automated vehicles and work zones, gather some high-level perceptions on their viewpoint of impacts between connected and automated vehicle technologies and work zones. Next slide, please. So focus area 1, we have questions that are targeted more towards deployed and planned technologies. So this would include a list of known technologies and solutions, asking respondents to provide perceptions on usefulness, deployment difficulty, maturity, any available cost-benefit data that they're aware of, and perceived barriers of implementation that might exist with that particular technology. For any that we missed or weren't included in that list, an opportunity for respondents to let us know about additional technologies and solutions that we should consider. And then while we talked about a little bit of this in the lit review, any other related deployments that incorporate connected and automated vehicle technologies and specific to work zones, either those that are in progress or planned, so that we can better consider what those are accounting for and learn from those as well. On the next slide, we have focus area number 2, and that deals more with the technical needs and the potential impacts of connected and automated vehicle technologies. So again, questions that deal more with perceptions regarding impacts. And again, the common theme here is looking at impacts in both directions. So the impacts of connected and automated vehicles might have on work zones, and importantly, by the type of work zone, as well as work zones and their impact on connected and automated vehicle technologies. Then looking at challenges, limitations, and opportunities, collaboration on integration of these technologies, insights into what transportation agencies should be aware of from the perspective of the respondent, and then some insights into regulatory challenges. And then on the next slide goes into the focus group discussions. And I guess before I go to that, obviously it's easy to see that the challenge is to make the survey something that's not overwhelming in terms of allowing us to get the necessary feedback without being so exhaustive that it takes a long time for people to complete. And so one of the advantages of having a multi-staged approach here is that the focus group component will allow us to dive a little bit deeper and arguably focus more on issues that are more complex and probably too complex to include in the survey and the interview component. But that's why we're saying that the discussion guides that we're developing will largely be guided by the feedback that we get in the survey and the interview phase. And things that we're considering focusing on include liability, for example, accommodating range of operational capabilities from different automated vehicle manufacturers, for example, regulation requirements, data sharing. So those are that's just a short list of example topics that we're planning to include. So to wrap up on the next slide, where we're looking for assistance is based on what we're working on right now. So for example, contact identification. If this sounds of interest and based on your job duties and expertise, if this is something that you want to participate in, please let us know. Again, we are starting to really develop our list of contacts, and we're working with other organizations to make sure we are able to cast a wide net, but it doesn't hurt to let us know if this is something that you definitely want to be included in, and we'll make sure that you're on the list. Otherwise, if you have suggestions of specific individuals, agencies or companies that we should be working with, other organizations or committees or listservs that we haven't mentioned before, all of that would be greatly appreciated. And then I know with respect to the survey, we just gave a high-level overview of topic suggestions, but if there's anything that stands out to you that you feel we need to cover, either in the survey or the focus groups, we welcome that feedback as well. And then obviously any other domain relevant information would be greatly appreciated. You guys have a lot of experience in this area, and that's one of the reasons we were excited about the opportunity to present today. So with that, I'll exit out of here and invite my team members to all join for the question and answer component. I believe they've been monitoring the chat. I've also posted the email address at the bottom there. So cavsandworkzones@vtti.vt.edu. You can reach us if you have any questions or recommendations per the previous slide. So with that, I thank everyone for their attention, and we'll open it up to questions. I don't know, I'll ask the team if they've noticed any questions come up while I was presenting, if we want to talk about those yet.
Well, it looks like the key questions were surrounding the getting involved, and I think your last slide there with the email address is the best way for people to contact you. And yeah, and Tammy just posted that, so it's good.
Yeah, absolutely, that's great. And realistically, you know, while it would have been great to provide an update on more progress, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do that later in the project, I think what worked out really nice with respect to timing here is because we're focusing on the development of our engagement task, this is a really good opportunity to get awareness of it ahead of time, and then any other suggestions from the community that we can build in either on the materials or who we're specifically reaching out to. So I really appreciate any feedback that you all can share. Happy to answer any other questions.
And maybe after people have time to look at the slides, once they're shared, if anything comes to you, please feel free to reach out and let us know.
Absolutely. Yeah, Matt has a copy of these, and I think just like all the other sessions, these will be shared. So like I said, we have a review with the panel in mid-April. So any feedback in the coming weeks would be you know, certainly very timely for us to incorporate. Yeah, thanks, Tammy, for including that in the chat.
For waiting on any questions, I just would like to add that I think the presentations that we heard in the session prior to this is a really good example of a lot of the great work that's going on the data side of work zones, much of which will tie into this project in terms of how to accommodate that from the transportation agency side.
Absolutely. Got names from the agenda that we'll be adding to our list if they weren't there already, right?
Exactly. One question I guess I would ask then Luke as well is your thoughts about the fact that we talk about the connected and automated vehicle community as a monolith, but recognize that there are many manufacturers within that world, and each of them are going to have their own operational design domain, you know, within which these vehicles will work. What are your thoughts about being able to accommodate the fact that this company's connected vehicle might work with this type of solution, but company-wise may not? How might that bear upon the transportation agency to take that into consideration?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's certainly a topic area that I think we'll focus on, probably more so in the focus groups when we get to that point. But yeah, having a better understanding of when OEMs or suppliers who are developing this technologies have their own constraints within what they expect or what they feel like their technology will work within, having a better understanding of what the allowances are, or maybe there's some common ground there where a single solution can address all the perceived limitations or capabilities of the different technologies. And so I think that's obviously a critical point within this project, is to try to find that common ground and harmonization.
Definitely, that's good.
How's it going, guys?
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Luke and Paul and the VTTI team. That was a great presentation. And we'll keep an eye on the Q&A. And we look forward to hearing about the progress of this later in the fall.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to opportunities to share what we learn. I appreciate you having us on today.
Yes, thank you so much. We
Sure.
really enjoyed that.
If I may just add, in response to Praveen's question, absolutely, we plan to work with the WZDX projects as closely as possible, depending on their progress, and are anxious to see the awards were just made and announced, and so we want to definitely coordinate with those projects. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Thanks for catching that.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
So now we'd like to transition into our innovation session. We have two speakers for our innovation session this afternoon. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Todd Hartnett with Hill & Smith. Todd is currently working as Business Development Director at Hill & Smith, Inc. Todd Hartnett was one of the original team members implementing the first smart work zones being deployed within the U.S. With 17 years focused on developing the ITS market, Todd has not only a vast experience in all things ITS, but is also a resource for design, specification, writing, new product development, and project management. Todd, thank you for joining me on stage. I will turn it over to you for your presentation.
Okay, so I guess I'm up and running, Katie.
That's right, Todd, you are. You ready to go?
Okay, so a little bit about who we are. Obviously, we're with Hill & Smith. Hill & Smith has three different divisions. The three divisions that we are in are, as you see here, Work Zone Safety. Work Zone Safety, we're pretty much a manufacturer of everything on the highway safety side of the business, in plastics, message boards, arrow boards, full matrix signs, flashing beacon trailers, all different types of product devices from that side of the business. ITS Smart Work Zone is obviously the division that I head up. It's going to be a compilation of some form of traffic detection, variable speed limit, triggering of message signs, websites, the automated back end behind the ITS project, and then of course feeding a lot of that raw data and information directly to the state. ITS Smart Work Zone obviously being a big buzzword across the country lately. Federal Highway has now written a Smart Work Zone implementation guide that most states are using to determine whether or not their projects justify utilization of a Smart Work Zone. So pretty much a hot topic, has become a pretty popular topic across the country. And then our third division is the roadside safety, where we are the manufacturer of the #1 crash cushion on the market called the Smart Cushion. It's the resettable end treatment unit, and then Zone Guard is our steel barrier wall that is much lighter and makes it a lot more feasible than the typical concrete barrier systems out there today. So that's the three divisions and who we are. And I've pretty much been in my role for 17 and a half years now, going back to the early days, where only 2 or 3 states utilized Smart Work Zone technology within the entire U.S. So been around a long time, know all of the products, know all of the businesses that are in the market, and remember the good old days. So next slide, please. So Smart Work Zone solutions. So the terminology is constantly changing. Each state calls it something different. It may be termed a temporary ITS solution. It could be termed real-time traffic management. There's various systems that fall under the umbrella of Smart Work Zone solutions, but basically it's the concept designed around making a safer work zone environment. So the #1 bullet point of a Smart Work Zone solution is to reduce that rear end collision. So the means in which you accomplish that is you disseminate that traffic data far enough upstream where you're empowering the driver to make an educated decision as to, do I take an alternate route, or at least I'm aware of conditions ahead prior to getting into those conditions. So obviously the end result of utilization of a Smart Work Zone is a reduction in volume through that work zone area, which then increases the safety for not only the traveling public through that particular corridor, but also the work zone personnel within that are working that work zone project. I've heard numerous data points on the national averages as to what the reduction does in terms of safety, and historically, from what I've heard, they're running at about a 45% clip in the reduction of accidents that are occurring when you're utilizing a Smart Work Zone solution. So next slide, please. Yep, looks like we're a little jumbled here, but there it goes. So real-time travel information. So there's a handful of different routes that you can go when deploying a Smart Work Zone system, and a real-time travel information system is specifically that. So you're looking for X number of minutes over X number of miles, or to the next exit, and pretty much a relay of that information to those message sets upstream and message sets throughout the work zone. So there's a couple companies out there that utilize third-party probe data. INRIX is one of the companies that allows you to utilize just speed data as opposed to deploying equipment in the field. So, somebody like an INRIX, for example, they're pulling data from long-haul transportation trucks. They're pulling data from an OEM environment, the manufacturers that are partnered with that third-party data company, which is giving you the in-vehicle data and the hard braking data and the incident management data. And then they're also pulling data from the app. So if you've got a project where you're deploying either in a tight space where you can't fit equipment, or maybe you're going through tunnels, like in Boston is a good example. In those scenarios, it's a lot more feasible to utilize third-party data than placement of equipment. In that scenario, it also is a huge cost savings because now you've got a massive reduction in equipment deployed, and then you can start your data collection before they even before the project starts. So then you can get a pre, during, and post data collection point that then empowers the project manager to make better decisions on, hey, do I want to, close a lane or do a lane shift based off of what we're seeing, as opposed to just literally just deploying a SmartWorks zone per spec. So it makes it a little bit more dynamic in that respect. The equipment involved in a real-time travel information system is going to be your typical traffic data collection devices and message sets as normal. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. I felt like that was the music that comes on when I'm doing an acceptance speech. That's the heads up, keep moving. Dynamic lane merge is a slightly modified version of a queue detection system. So in that scenario, you've got a taper that's being developed as a result of reduction of lanes. So you're taking 2 lanes to 1 as an example. In that scenario, you're setting up message sets right at the taper that's basically driving messages that say merge here, take turns. There are products out there such as connected drums that have the ability to depict that lane merge through a website. And then obviously connected arrow boards are a popular topic now. A lot of states are moving to connected field devices on everything that they're putting out, specifically arrow boards. Haas Alert is one of the products that are utilized to disseminate that information to Waze. So when you do have that lane shift or construction project and need that dynamic merge relayed out, you can certainly accomplish that through those devices. Next slide. Traffic detection solutions. So you can drill down a little bit farther into the depth as to which you want to accomplish your data collection. Couple different options. You could go with something as generic as K-band radar, which is just going to give you speed information. You're not going to have the ability to detect per lane or multi-direction. So oftentimes when you're designing a project, if the project is only a single lane, single direction, you can get away with a lower end data collection device that makes that project a little more financially feasible, and of course makes the project more flexible. Obviously, we talked about the third-party data. Third-party data, enables the designer to use that raw data without deploying any devices in the field. And then, of course, you have your typical sensors. Wavetronix is one of the main manufacturers of your traffic data collection, which is going to give you speed, volume, occupancy, classification per lane. You could ignore shoulders. You can ignore exit ramps. You can ignore the medians and still accomplish multi-direction. So if you've got a northbound, southbound project, instead of placing sensors on both sides of that highway, with a Wavetronix sensor, you have the ability to capture multi-direction both sides with a single sensor. So again, from a design perspective, it makes that project much more financially feasible to do a single unit that can see both versus a less qualified unit, I would say, or a lower end unit that is only looking at those particular lanes. Next slide. So warning alerts, obviously the goal is to disseminate that information to the driver. So you've got your traffic data collection component. Now we need to get that information out to the public. A lot of states are starting to use the VSLs, which is the variable speed limit sign that enables Department of Transportation to provide that as kind of a calming effect coming across or entering into that particular work zone. If you place the VSLs prior to and through the work zone, in that scenario, you're hoping to get the calming of traffic and smoothing of that queue and volume through that particular work zone. And then, of course, you've got your typical message boards, and a lot of projects are now starting to deploy flashing beacon trailers. So when you do have speeds drop below a set predetermined threshold, in that scenario, you've obviously got some form of an incident or at least a queue occurring. And in that scenario, you want to trigger those flashing beacon signs to then empower the driver of conditions ahead. Next slide. Yep, that's it. 8 slides. I'm quick. The end. Any questions?
Wonderful. Thank you, Todd. I was going to give it a minute to see if we had anything come in the Q&A panel. Questions, if you have them, please enter them in the far right. Give that a second. Thank you, Todd, for that very helpful overview of Hill and Smith's efforts for smart work zones. Yeah.
Yep.
Just so everybody knows, Hill and Smith's booth is on every floor of the conference. So if you do have questions, please swing by. Todd and his colleagues are there throughout the entire conference to answer questions. So, thank you, Todd.
Thanks, Katie.
And you can go ahead and just turn your camera and mic off. Perfect. Now I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Laura Huizinga with Lindsay Transportation. Laura has worked in the road building and safety industry for 20 years. She currently represents Lindsay Transportation Solutions as a regional manager covering the Eastern United States and Canada. Laura was employed as a general manager of a guardrail installation company and also sales and marketing director for a barricade rental company. She is a member of the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices Temporary Traffic Committee, president of ARPA's Traffic Safety Industry Division, and co-chair of ARPA's Safety Forum. Throughout the years, Laura has participated in numerous industry committees and organizations to gain work zone safety knowledge. Thank you for joining us, Laura, and the stage is yours.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, friends. It's good to see you. And if you've known me in person, you know I really am excited to see you, whether it's virtually or in real life, and hopefully I'll see you in real life soon. I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about safety and work zone safety, because that's what we're here to talk about for this conference. This slide here, I found this Just Drive public service announcement a couple of years ago, and I really love it because I think it kind of it helps us focus a little bit about what we're trying to do within work zone safety. So, I mean, you can read through it, but I like it. It was just a quick call, a quick trip, one drink, one picture, an email, a text, a glance, a distraction from your little kids yelling at you from the back seat. Maybe that's your real life. That's mine. And at the end of the day, it's just is all that it takes. And we're seeing a huge rise in distracted drivers. This was from the Pew Charitable Trust. Normally I'm pulling things from the laborers' websites or FHWA or even the ARPA websites, but this was from the Pew Charitable Trust, where they were talking about work zone crashes climbed during the pandemic, even as traffic ebbs. And it really speaks to the fact that people were more distracted, driving faster than they should be. And this statement in particular was really striking to me from the FHWA, that work zones are particularly dangerous because of daily changes in traffic patterns, which it can be hard for some people to navigate, narrowed rights of way and other construction activities. And according to FHWA, crews working close to moving traffic, sometimes just a few feet away. For those of us that have worked out there, it can be a really eye-opening and maybe frightening experience to be working next to 70-mile-per-hour traffic with just a channelizing device separating you from that motoring public. And I know we've seen these statistics and heard about them, but this was from October of last year, and it was that travel on the roads and streets dropped 40% in April last year, 26% in May, but fatal crashes increased in some states and traffic volume picked up in recent months. Work zone crews still are encountering speeding and more distracted drivers. So I think we have our work cut out for us in coming years. I know that we were on a really good downward trend. with a lot of our safety stats, but based on some of the presentations I heard yesterday, those are climbing back up. So we've got our work cut out for us. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about work zones. Work zones can be a major cause of congestion. And we know when we have congestion, we can have mobility issues. User delay costs and mobility are always a problem, but we can have those back queue crashes, which I've heard referenced numerous times in this conference. Work zones can be up to 10% of the major source of traffic congestion. And they can also, traffic is a major source of work zone accidents as well. About 12% of work zone accidents are caused by the motoring public next to around our work zones. Next slide, please. So what can we do about it? Well, I don't know about you, but in the last few years, I've seen a really increased focus on work zone safety, which is so exciting. There's increased guidance in the NPA on the MUTCD concerning positive protection, really incorporating the language of subpart K into the manual to try to drive home when you should be considering some form of positive protection of the work zone. ARPA has an intrusion prevention task force, which I'm honored to be part of. And all I hear from the contracting community is we need to do more. We need to do more to have safer work zones, which is phenomenal because I'm hearing it from both sides, both from FHWA, DOT, and associations and the contracting community, all working together to drive for safer work zones. And I've seen some states start to look really at how they can do things differently. Alternative options to temporary lane closures with channelizing devices. For example, I know Indiana has started to do some full closures with detours, maybe up to 30 days. And these are major roads. And it can be a little tough to navigate. And I know there's a lot of public effort and public awareness going on when they do one of these closures, but they are able to get a lot of work done really safely by having a full closure. Other areas are really starting to look at where can we get away with a static lane closure with barrier. Maybe not for a whole summer, but maybe for 2 months or 2 weeks or a month. Where could we do that? I know there could be a mobility issue. However, the safety is worth it. So there's a little bit of trade-off there. And then one of the options, and this is the company that I work for, it could be movable or mobile barriers. I don't work for mobile barriers, but I do work for Lindsay, who has the movable barrier. But these solutions are temporary barriers that can be quickly mobilized or moved out to protect a work zone. Next slide, please. So I have a video about the Road Zipper, and if Matt would show that, you'll see a little bit about what we do here at Lindsay. Forgive me, there's a little bit of road noise on this one. This was in Indiana, on I-65, where they were doing concrete paving rehab or patching. This project, they moved the barrier out at night between the hours of 7 p.m. and 4 a.m. to provide a barrier-separated work zone. The year before, this was a 2-year project. The first year of this project, they used channelizing devices. And the second year, they did a change order to put movable barrier onto the job. The concern was that the workers felt like they were in the game of Frogger. And if you know what that means, you're with me in that same age group. Very cool. If you don't know what that means, just Google it. It really was a cool game. I know you may not think it is, but it really was cool back in the day. But they were really having a huge issue with motorists driving through the channelizing devices and not really paying attention to the barrier wall. So I want to talk about reimagining safety. I know a lot of the projects that are designed and put into place, we're following what we've done for years. We have our mobility plans in place. We have our traffic control plans. But I want you to think about what could you do if you could do something differently. In Indiana, I mentioned them, they're using movable barrier for concrete paving rehab patching work. In some states, you might think, we just do that behind channelizing devices. Why would you do that behind barrier? Well, on some corridors, they have high traffic. This work is done at night, so it's a little bit more dangerous than the daytime work, and they have high truck traffic. And we've seen it a couple of times. Actually, my picture here is one of our projects from last summer in I-70, where there's been some pretty big hits into that wall. And it might sound a little strange, but I'm actually thrilled when there's a big hit into the wall and I get pictures like this because it means that the wall did its job. On this job, a semi-truck driving past the work zone lost a tire. And the reason why the wall is so snaked around is because the truck just kept slamming into the wall as it deaccelerated. I talked to a DOT friend a couple weeks ago, and they mentioned to me that there was a worker killed in their state when a truck tire came off and rolled right into the work zone area and killed a worker. So this was a great solution. Yes, it adds a little bit more time to the job, and you have to move the wall back and forth. But in this particular project, we had 9 hits, and the contractor was thrilled to be behind that wall because that meant 9 times there wasn't a major vehicle intrusion into the work zone. Another example is median barrier and guardrail replacement. We've been working on these types of projects over the last few years where the barrier is placed alongside of the median that's being worked on. And at night, you can move the barrier out to give yourself a little bit bigger work zone and move it back in the morning. So you're able to really accommodate the peak traffic periods while providing a barrier separated work zone. Another example would be echelon paving. This was a really innovative idea, and I think it really goes to the concept of reimagining safety. In Minnesota, they wanted to do echelon paving, which I didn't know what that was, so they explained to me, multiple pavers driving side by side, so you have a really smooth, beautiful paved surface. But that required a full closure of 494, which was a 2-2 separated interstate. What they did was really creative. They created a crossover scenario where you had a crossover at the beginning and end of the paving section. They put movable barrier on the side that was not going to be paved. And when they were going to do paving on the weekends, they moved the movable barrier 1 lane over. So they had 2 lanes on the non-paved side in the normal direction, let's just say northbound, and 1 in the southbound, all on the side that wasn't being constructed. And then they detoured 1 lane onto arterial routes. It helped to get the project done quickly, safely, and efficiently because that paving work was not done under traffic. They had the whole interstate to themselves to get the job done, which was great. We're also used on bridge work. That's kind of a normal application. Neil Boudreau presented on his ComAv project. We were proud to be part of that project and provide some maintenance of traffic assistance. Actually, the same kind of scenario as what I just described for that echelon paving job. And we've also had deck replacement patching, substructure replacement. But one of the more innovative ones was out west in Washington this summer, where they used movable barrier for bridge painting. Now, I've seen a lot of bridge painting jobs in my lifetime driving around this country, and a lot of times they're behind static wall. And if you can't give up the mobility for static barrier, then it's done behind channelizing devices with a big curtain. I've always kind of wondered what's going on behind the curtain. But with movable barrier, you could give those lanes back when the work isn't being done and have a barrier separated and protected work zone. Next slide, please. So movable barrier can give you safe, efficient traffic control. You have minimal worker exposure in setting up and taking down the lane closure. One of my jobs, I used to work for a traffic control company, and the traffic control companies really are out there first and last, and they're setting up the lane closures and taking them down, and it can be one of the most dangerous parts of the work zone setup. With movable barrier, you have a machine setting the barrier, so you don't have people out there pulling drums out and putting them back at the end of the lane closure or on the work period. You don't have to have a channelized lane closure adjacent to static barrier wall when you have a lane closure or a static or shoulder closure. Some states have that where you have the barrier wall protecting the work zone, but then you create a haul lane behind channelizing devices. This eliminates that need for that additional channelized lane closure and keeps all the work activity within that closed lane. You can have longer, more efficient work zones. When I used to work for the traffic control company, which was a little while ago, we used to say it took about 45 minutes to set a mile of a lane closure with channelizing devices. With movable barrier, we do that in 15 minutes. So you can gain up to about an hour of extra productivity work time within that work shift. And you have positive separation and protection of that work zone throughout. Next slide. So just quickly, some of the benefits of a flexible positive protection solution. It's increased safety. You have reduced risk of traffic queues because you're giving all lanes back during the peak traffic period or providing the normal lane closure, normal lane pattern for the peak traffic direction. You can have increased workspace for the contractors. That can help you to get the job done a little bit safer. And maybe even a little faster. Sometimes we see cost savings. You could have reduced project staging and or duration, and reduced user delay costs. And whenever a contractor is working behind barrier, I don't care whose barrier it is, productivity tends to go up. I've heard anywhere from 5 to 20%. I think that's my last slide. Can you go to one more, Matt? So that's it. Thank you so much for your time and attendance and the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you to ArtBuff for this opportunity. And for all 85 of you that stuck it out to the last minute, great job. We'll see you tomorrow. Please stop by my booth and say hi. If you have questions, please ask.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for sharing the innovative approaches and projects Lindsay Transportation is working on to raise the bar on work zone safety. So for questions, please enter them in the Q&A panel. It looks like we've got one. Need list of recently completed projects and applications, DOT contact info.
I would be happy to do that. Could you please send me an email? Katie, could you put my,
Yeah, absolutely.
Just put my email in there, and forgive me if I'm saying your name incorrectly, but for Jawad, please just email me and I'd be happy to help address that question and give you some information. Thank you.
I will throw your email in there.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Jawad, for the question. Let's see, we've got one other one coming in. Thank you, Matt. The next question, Laura, what was the deflection where the semi hit the wall multiple times?
Oh, Catherine, I'm not allowed to answer that one. One, I don't know it. And two, I can tell you what our deflection is based on NCHRP 350 tests. This was not a design capacity impact. It was a lower angle, a larger vehicle than what's required for test level 3. And honestly, I don't know what it was. When I look at the photo, it looked pretty minimal, but I don't have any of that information that I think would be really helpful to tell you, oh, it was traveling at this speed, at this impact angle, and it was carrying a legal load of whatever. I just don't have that to share with you. I'm so sorry. But Catherine, if you want to talk about deflection under MASH or NCHRP 350, we are completely tested for both of those. Send me an email and we can have a chat or an email about it, and be happy to help you there.
Thank you, Lauren. It looks like we have one more in the similar realm, though. What was the speed of the semi at the time of the hit? I don't believe you have that available. So again, Laura will be at the booth to the right of the conference, to the right of the stage on the conference floor. So for any questions, please email her directly, or please stop by, turn on your camera and your microphone and have a chat. So thank you. And Matt, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks.
All right, so if there we go, Katie's got herself turned off. Well, thank you all very much for an exciting day 2 of the 2021 Virtual National Workzone Management Conference. You're welcome to stick around for the next half an hour or so and network and chat. Tomorrow the floor opens up again at noon, so please feel free to join us. We'll begin our first session, the roundtable discussion on field training needs. Where are the gaps? Which promises to be an excellent session, and that is at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time. So until then, we'll sign off and we'll see you tomorrow.